Come to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement in the House yesterday in answer to oral question number 2 that his government is selling assets because New Zealanders want less debt, more productive assets and an economy that is going to function, not a load more debt?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I actually said was that one of the reasons we have 59 MPs and the Labour Party has very few is, quote, because New Zealanders want less debt, more productive assets and an economy that is going to function, not a load more debt, as Phil Goff was promising, and I have no doubt David Shearer is as well. I certainly stand by that statement.
David Shearer.
Speaker. Does he believe that his asset sale policy is not about paying off debt, it's just about not borrowing more?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think there's a range of reasons why the mixed ownership model makes so much sense. They are because I think the companies will perform better. It's because New Zealand will have less debt. It's because we'll have $5 to $7 billion to put into the future fund. So there are a variety of reasons. It'll build out the capital markets, and of course there now are approximately 1.8 million Kiwi saver accounts, mums and dads who want to invest in real New Zealand assets. Those New Zealanders are dying to invest in New Zealand.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallon.
Mr. Speaker, that was a very precise question about the repayment of debt. Sir, there was a, and you might want to ask my colleague to ask it again. It was a specific question and very narrow, and it wasn't even addressed.
I'll hear briefly the Honourable Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's pretty clear that the order of the day is a bit of disruption around this particular series of questions.
That is not a point
No,
of
it's
order.
an observation. I apologise.
But the member should not be doing it.
I withdraw as well. But the point of order I'd make is, or to the point of order, what I would say is simply that the Prime Minister's answer, and Hansard will bear it out, but I'm sure when you reconsider that later, as I know you do, gave a range of responses to the question that Mr. Shearer asked. There's no reason why an assumption should be made that the strict one prescription inside the question was what had to be agreed to. Not at all. You asked, did he believe something?
I accept the point that the Honourable Leader of the House has made. The question asked whether a certain reason was the reason for certain actions taking place, and the Prime Minister pointed out actually there were other reasons as well. I think that's a perfectly reasonable answer. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Prime Minister read comments by economic commentator Brian Fallow that the asset sales are certainly not the solution to fiscal problems in relation to his last answer?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no.
Speaker.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How is it fiscally rational to sell assets that Treasury tells us are earning 15% in order to substitute for debt which would cost us 4%?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, all of that will be clear when the budget policy statement is released on the 16th of February, but in broad terms, the cost of funding of debt that would otherwise have to be incurred by the country if there wasn't the resources coming from the mixed ownership model is actually slightly more expensive than the dividend return overall. Some years there have been super profits earned by SOEs, but in fact they're embedded in the future price likely to be paid by investors.
The Leader of the Opposition.
How does he square that, his answer to the answer to supplementary number 1 with the latest Crown Assets Portfolio report, which found that 2011 dividends were a record for the last 5 years, that the energy companies, quote, have wider benefits to New Zealand, including securing New Zealand's future electricity supplies?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, I haven't seen that report, but I do recall the year where there probably was the most super profits, and that was the year when Meridian sold Southern Hydro, sort of a bit like selling 49% in an exceptional times.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Could the Prime Minister tell the country what more productive assets, to use his words, he has in mind than those 4 power companies he intends to sell to mum and dad investors who own them already, as do the Kiwi Saver account holders own those companies already? What are the more productive assets he's talking about?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, firstly, I think it's an interesting point to recognise what the Crown balance sheet actually looks like, because at the moment it sits at $245 billion, and over the next 4 years it will net increase by a further $22 billion. So New Zealand mums and dads, as he put it, in 4 years' time, under the leadership of this government, will have $267
Point of order,
billion.
the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, my question was very precise. It asked the Prime Minister to tell the country what are the more productive assets, in his words, he has in mind for the people who already own those power companies he intends to flog off.
Order.
Point of order.
I'll hear the Honourable Leader of the House.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is every question getting challenged, which is not a good circumstance for the House to get itself into. But I would have thought that if he was asking the question about what productive assets mums and dad New Zealanders are going to have, more productive, whichever way you want to put it, the Prime Minister was outlining quite considerable increases in assets they're going to have. Perfectly reasonable.
Order. The member shouldn't be adding that kind of opinion into a point of order. But the member asked about matters to do with assets. The Prime Minister was actually answering in a very rational way about the balance sheet, and he hadn't finished yet. And I think the Prime Minister should be given the opportunity to finish. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So firstly, the proposition that the member makes is factually incorrect, and he should know that. It's $267 billion in assets, not $245 as today. And secondly, if you want my view, $1 billion being taken out of some of these assets and put into 21st century schools to educate the future of our young kids is actually more important than owning 100% of Meridian.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, now look, I did not enumerate any figure as to the assets. That's he made it up himself. The second thing, I asked for the more productive assets. That means, in a commercial scale of things, what would be more productive than the 15% plus assets of the four power companies?
Order.
And he won't address the question.
Order. The member is now seeking to debate the matter. Well, I apologise to the member. I'm obviously stupid, but if talking about returns on assets is not debating the matter, then forgive me. But the member asked a question about these more productive assets. The Prime Minister answered in relation to the whole balance sheet, and then actually talked about the assets that are important to the government, and he talked about school assets, which that was the Prime Minister's answer to the question. And it's not for me to judge that answer. It was definitely an answer to the question. The Leader of the
question.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Would the Prime Minister tell us what the commercial rate of return is for the school assets he proposes for this country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, there's a number of dividends that come from having school children educated in 21st century schools, and if the member doesn't know that,
Order.
you should go and
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston
Speaker,
Peters.
I asked him what was the commercial rate of return. Not a whole lot of social valuations, but the commercial rate of return. And I'm asking you to make him answer the question.
Order. The member can't expect an answer to be exactly what he'd like the answer to be. If a member asks a question like that, the Minister, in answering it, will give what the Minister sees as being a rational answer. And the Minister, I believe the Prime Minister was giving a rational answer to the question asked. And it's not for, question time is not about members being able to elicit from ministers exactly the answer they want. They ask questions, and the better the question, the better the answer. But is the way it works, and members need to think about their questions. So, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given his answer to supplementary question number 1, has the Prime Minister read the Treasury report which found, quote, little evidence to suggest that privatisation would significantly improve the financial performance of many of the SOE companies?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes. And where I would draw some difference of opinion would be in the potential opportunity of many of these companies. If we go and take a look at Mighty River Power as a good example, here's a company with world-class geothermal technology looking to take that to the world. We are a capital-strapped government, so we're not going to invest in that way, but others might. And interestingly enough, when that monkey over there making all that noise was in government, he was actually proposing they do exactly that because he wanted to float the offshoot subsidiaries on the stock exchange. He promoted it, but now he's in opposition. He just goes like this.
The Leader of the Opposition. Order. Order. I've called the Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Is it his intention for the Crown to indemnify the privatised companies and shareholders for their losses resulting from treaty issues?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think the member clearly demonstrated yesterday he doesn't have an answer to who owns water, and today he doesn't understand the treaty, which is a compact between the Crown and Maori.
Supplementary.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Miller.
Mr Speaker, I think it was a very clear question about whether it's the government's intention to indemnify those companies for any losses that they suffer. That was not addressed. In fact, sir, the answer was offensive.
The Honourable Leader of the House.
The question carried an inference which under strict standing orders would make the question out of order. The Prime Minister's response was appropriate because he was inferring that there would be losses because of the treaty. That is not a factual position at all.
Order. Now, order. I think I think we've had enough on this issue. I think I accept the concern that the answer was perhaps unnecessarily unhelpful. But it did actually answer the question in that the Prime Minister's answer was arguing that, in fact, because the treaty is a matter between the Crown and Maori, the Prime Minister seemed to be arguing that that there would not be, therefore, losses to private companies as a consequence. Now, if members think that is not a very good answer, ask the Prime Minister even in more detail about it. That's what question time's about. The answer may not have been the greatest answer, but I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition is capable of asking further pointed questions to dig into it further.
Supplementary.
Taurua Flavel.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Kia ora tātou katoa. To the Prime Minister, if the government has the duty of active protection and upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi, why would it propose the removal of Section 9 of the State-Owned Enterprises Act, which in effect lets not just investors but the government off the hook?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the government has absolutely no intention of removing Section 9 from the SOE Act.
Question. No. I beg your pardon. Supplementary. Order. Order. I say to members, it's hard for me to hear. Dr Russell Norman, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Prime Minister telling this House that Treasury are wrong when in their 2011 Crown Ownership Monitoring Unit report they report that these companies are earning a total return for the government of 15% per annum on average over the last 5 years?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no. What I'm telling the country is that the dividend flow is broadly in terms of the foregone interest payments that would be required if debt was secured, remembering that the government will always be retaining 51% or more of those dividends because of its investment, and that there may be some other super profits that are earned, but they're captured in the value of the company and will be in the valuations.
A supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
What would the Prime Minister's advice be to someone who received financial advice from an advisor who told them that they should sell assets returning 15% in order to pay down debt that cost them 4%?
I'm not sure about the Prime Minister's ministerial responsibility. However,
An opinion.
the members, I don't want to prevent the Prime Minister from being able to answer the question where he's asked an opinion. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
If it was like that, I might tell them not to do it, but that's not the case, because in this case, the value difference that the person's talking about, is off some pretty ropey numbers, I might say, to start off. Just to give you an idea, that same valuation unit he's talking about moves Solid Energy's valuation from $475 million in 2007 to $2,954 million in 2008. And I know they had a good year, but it wasn't quite that good. And secondly, any kind of other changes that implied in the value that we paid by shareholders.
Question number 2, Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you.